So just close your eyes for a minute, and I want you to imagine life without any electricity, without a phone, without a car, without a shower. And this is how a lot of people that I met when I went to the Honduran mountains, this is how they lived. They didn't have any modern conveniences like you and I think of. It's a very, very third world country, very poor. These children or these people, these families, live in the jungle up in the mountains in a mud-built house, maybe with a latrine as a bathroom, but most of them don't even have that. And they have really no connection to the outside world unless they venture down into the city, which is, again, not as well kept, not as well run as the city you would imagine here in America. So if you're a child up in the mountains of Honduras, you'll walk hours to school every day with big rain boots to go through the puddles and twisting dirt paths. You may hope to get further education someday in the city, but most likely you'll just stay in the mountains with your family and continue to farm, which is what most of them do when they live up there in the mountains. So this is the kind of environment that we were visiting when we went to the mountains of Honduras. Honduras is in Central America, so below Mexico, but above South America. And I looked up the religion of the country, and the internet said that it was 97% Catholic and 3% Protestant. But really, a lot of this is just in name. So a lot of these people are not practicing Catholics, but they just kind of say that because it's so ingrained in the culture there. So my particular trip, we landed in Tegucigalpa, which is the capital city of Honduras. And then we traveled to an area called Catacamas to visit the ministry called Predesan. So Predesan was begun in 1986 by one family, and now it's expanded to reach all different areas throughout the country of Honduras. And it's a health clinic and a community development ministry with a strictly Christian Protestant message. And so this was kind of the missions agency that we partnered with, that TPS goes and partners with. And then we go with translators and different people from Predesan to go up into the mountains and then minister to those villages up there. So we visited the Predesan building and heard the story of that ministry and how a lot of Honduran people themselves are actually involved in that, which is something really cool. The most effective missionaries are sometimes the ones who come from that own country themselves. And so that was neat to see how the Hondurans themselves were really involved in reaching out to their own people in the ways of health and community development and just spiritual help as well. So as a team, we went up and we took jeeps up to a base camp in the mountains of Honduras, and we stayed there for basically the majority of the time. It was a little bit over a week that we stayed up there. And that base camp was kind of a mix of rusticness and natural beauty. So we had, a sink, we had showers, but we also had parrots outside the window. There were dogs barking all night, chickens, there were spiders that would come in and out of the house and in and out of those rooms. So it was kind of a mix of, jungle and then what we're normally used to. But it was nice to stay in for the time that we were there. So each day we woke up and we drove to a village. And there were two different villages that our group reached out to. The two villages we each visited for 3 days. One was called Las Flores and one was San Antonio. And the people's transportation is usually walking or horses and sometimes motorcycles, but none of them have cars. So the fact that we had jeeps to get to these villages was very, very helpful. We got there a lot faster than most people actually did. So when we arrived at each village, we did different activities with the people, and especially with the kids. So the main thing that a lot of us teenagers helped out with was the kids' activities. We did Bible skits in Spanish. We taught English to the kids. We did outdoor field games since the open field was their gym. And we also did crafts. So kind of if you imagine a VBS with kids, that's what we did with these kids in the villages. Now, some of the adults, we also had a team of pastors as part of our TPS team. And so they did a lot of adult activities. So some of the women did activities, cooking with the moms of the children who were in our programming. They did Bible studies for the adults. They did crafts with the women. And one of the pastors on our team who was fluent in Spanish, he would give messages and Bible studies to the adults. My mom was on this trip, and she was able to share her testimony with the adults. She has a really cool story. And with the use of a translator, she was able to do that with those parents there. So that was another aspect of the ministry in the villages. Another option was house visiting. So I did this one of the days, and you went with a translator and a pastor and then maybe one or two teenagers, and you would walk to nearby houses throughout the villages. So we visited one family who, it was a woman whose husband had died recently in the past year, and we really just talked to her. We prayed with her, gave her some Bible verses and encouragement, and we just, went to visit the people in their own homes and just talk with them and give them encouragement. So that was the purpose of the house visiting. Another thing that we did was medical care. So we had a doctor on the team as well, and he would give checkups to these people since they rarely get doctor treatment. And finally, there was the construction team, which we would build latrines for these people, and part of the group cost of going on the trip was to pay for the construction of several latrines in the village. So we helped them build them a little bit, but most of it was just we were giving them the money and the ability to do that themselves, even after we left the country ourselves. So it was very, very eye-opening to go into these villages of Honduras. There were animals everywhere. It was very unclean. The bathrooms were very rustic. There was a lot of rain. Food came from the ground and the farms that the people had. So there was lots of kind of a tropical jungle environment, if you could imagine that. And it just really, like I said before, opened my eyes to the poverty of the world, because I'd never experienced anything outside of really America before. And so just to know with my eyes and not just hear about what goes on in a third world country, it really changed my perspective. And yeah, just opened my eyes to what really goes on in other people's lives. So two quick stories. One little boy who was in the villages, his name was Eric. He was such a sweet kid the entire time we were there. He would just come up to us. He would try to speak with us. And since I speak quite a bit of Spanish, I was able to have conversations with him. And at the very end of the visit, before we left his village, he told us that he wanted to be a pastor like Pastor Chris someday, who was the leader of our trip. And so that was just kind of special that he had this, goal after hearing from us, after seeing what a pastor was like, that he loves God so much that he wanted to be a pastor in the future as well. And he was just a little kid, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years old. Another story is that of a girl named Emmy, and she was actually one of the translators who was working for that ministry Predesam, and she would stay with us in the base camp the whole time. She was a native Honduran, and she would go with us to the villages and just translate for some people who didn't know as much Spanish as a lot of us. And so she was able to spend a lot of time with me talking actually at the base camp. We would lay in hammocks and just talk for several hours sometimes. And I was able to talk through a lot of things from her past. She's gone through a lot of hard things. And it really just kind of surprised me because I wasn't expecting to reach out to the translators or the people on the team. I was expecting to reach out to the village people, right? But I think God puts us in places on purpose. And so I was able to really give her some encouragement and friendship just as another person on the team with her. And she was a teenager just like me. She was about 16 years old. And the cool thing is, I befriended her on Instagram and Facebook later on because she lived down in the city. And a couple months ago, she messaged me online and said, "Hey, Cora, are you coming back this summer? We would really like to see you, and I'm going to be translating again." So it was just really cool to hear from her again. Like the relationships that are built are so neat to just continue. And I'm actually hoping to go again this summer. So hopefully I'll be able to see Emily again and see how her life is going. But the really cool thing about the Honduras trip is the relationships that are built. And that's why a lot of people go back year after year to see those same kids in the same villages and continue to reach out to them with the good news. So some takeaways from this Honduras trip. I realized, first of all, that I take so many things for granted here in America. And that sometimes when I complain about little things of technology not working or the food not being the greatest, I just think, wow, how ridiculous is that when so many other people, like I saw in Honduras, can't even imagine any of the things that I take for granted every day in America. And we have so many more opportunities as well, just in terms of education, in terms of outreach, worshiping God, just so many things that I take for granted in my everyday life. So that's one thing that I definitely took away from the visit to Honduras. I also realized that even those who possess few material possessions can have great joy. And this was something that really impacted me as well, that even though they didn't have a lot of things or a lot of resources or opportunities necessarily, they still had so much joy in life. And I found this to be something that was really cool and amazing. Psalm 5:11 says, "But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy, and spread your protection over them. that those who love your name may exult in you. So really, when people get to know the Lord, when they realize everything that God has done for them, it doesn't matter what specific situation they're in, or how many material possessions they have, where they live. They just have so much joy, and that's something that really impacted me as well, just visiting these people who had become Christians in those villages. Finally, I realized that the gospel is powerful everywhere because there are lost people everywhere. And everyone is sinners throughout the world. Everyone needs the good news of Christ. And it was really impactful to me. Just this was my first missions trip ever, and so the idea that people have that kind of perspective of following the Great Commission of Jesus really just reminded me that I should be doing that more in my life as well. Jesus' last words, as many of you have probably heard, Matthew 28:19-20, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So just kind of a reminder of Jesus' last words, his most important thing he wanted to tell his followers before he left, were to go out into all of the world and tell them about him and about the things that he has taught them. So those are kind of some of the takeaways from that first trip I went on to Honduras. God is doing great things throughout the whole world. So the second trip I went on, I was not expecting to go on another one in the same kind of span of the school year. That Honduras trip was last July, last summer. And then I heard about the Thailand trip, and it was another one about reaching out to children in particular. And I just thought, wow, this would be something really cool to do my senior year of high school. And I was able to raise the funds, and the scheduling worked out, and so I was able to go in January. And like I said, this was a very different trip in a lot of ways. The theme of this one to me was really opening my eyes to the depravity of the world. So I want you once again to close your eyes, imagine Thailand for a minute, and imagine growing up and feeling completely worthless. Everyone tells you that you must follow Buddha in order to reach enlightenment, or else your soul just continues to be reincarnated. If you are poor or weak or at a disadvantage somehow in life, it must be because you did something bad in your previous life. You're born in the mountain villages of Thailand, and one day your parents sell you to a man coming from the city who claims he'll give you a better life out of the country. Little do your parents know that you will actually end up in the sex trade, your body being bought and used and thrown away night after night. This story is very, very common among the people in the streets of Chiang Mai, which is one of the hottest destinations for sex tourism in the world. And this is the city that my team actually visited when we went to Thailand. And we heard just this common story of these people and how the idea of Buddhism, the idea of reincarnation, that, oh, whatever you are at right now in life must be because of something you did in the previous life, it really just reinforces kind of the little value of worth of humanity, and how people don't have a lot of compassion because they believe everything that they did was kind of a punishment for some bad thing you did in the past. So there's a lot of people who just ignore those who are in poverty, ignore those who are in really desperate situations. And the sex trade that we experienced there was so, so sad. So just an overview of my trip. The location of Thailand is in Southeast Asia, which is below China and near Laos and Cambodia. The religion of Thailand is 96% Buddhism, 2% Islam, 1% Christianity, and 1% other. So overwhelmingly a Buddhist culture. My trip, we visited the city of Chiang Mai, and we visited several different ministry things throughout that city. The first thing we did was visit the ministry called Lighthouse in Action, and this was led by a woman named Emmy, and she is a native Thai with a big heart for Jesus and his world. And so her particular ministry, Lighthouse in Action, she runs a cafe called Zion Cafe, and we actually stayed there overnight for several nights as we were visiting her ministry, helping out with that, and just kind of seeing what they do in the city of Chiang Mai. And that Lighthouse in Action, what this ministry does is kind of twofold. The first thing is called Love Acts, and this is the red light district and slums outreach ministry. So where they reach out to really the people who are involved in the sex trade ministry, or the sex trade in the red light district, that's what it's called, and also the poor people in the slums around that area. So as part of this Love Acts ministry, the people involved in this will go out actually into the bars of Chiang Mai, and they'll build relationships with the girls there as well as the ladyboys. And so their hope is that they'll see Jesus in the people that go out to visit them, and that they can offer them an alternative to the life they're living now. So what Emmy does is she will befriend these girls involved in that trade, and she'll actually offer them jobs to work in the cafe instead of what they were doing before. Because a lot of them are they become prostitutes because they have no other way of earning money. And so she gives them this alternate opportunity. They come to work for her cafe, and then she's able to reach out to them with the gospel and just give them a better life in general. And so she has people come and visit them in this cafe. Lots of mission groups go through, and they'll go out to do this, what they call bar ministry. And like I said, they just befriend the people that are working in the bars, and they try to just offer them a bigger perspective on life, that they don't have to keep doing this. They're worth more than what they're doing. And so this is really what that Love Acts ministry does. So my team, because we're just teenagers, we weren't allowed to actually go out into the bars at night and befriend these people. That would be a little bit dangerous for just us teenagers. But we did go out into the bar streets during the day, and we were able to talk with some of the bar moms, some of the prostitutes, some of the lady boys during the afternoon as they were just cleaning out their shops and getting ready for the night. And so that was really, really eye-opening, just to see how empty these people were. And you could tell that they did not have a lot of value. They didn't feel like they were worth anything. They were just very, very hopeless. And my team also, one day, we did a prayer walk through the bar streets. For several hours, we just walked through, praying for what was going on there, praying that God would reach these people and reach their hearts. So that's one of the main things that ministry we visited did. And the second thing is called X Life. And so X Life is part of the Lighthouse in Action ministry, and it's really the village outreach and prevention ministry. So this is where they try to send groups actually to the villages of Thailand, which is where a lot of those parents end up selling their children because they don't know any better. They don't know what they're actually going to be doing in the city. And so they try to increase just awareness and education of what this actually means to help it from starting in the first place. So this is kind of the prevention part of her ministry. And so what my team did is we actually went up into one of the villages, and we spent the night at a children's home. And this was where one Thai couple had several buildings kind of shaped in a U with different bedrooms for these children. And they really took in children who had been abused and mistreated, elementary age children, very young. And my team just spent a night up there playing with the children, just worshiping with them. The language barrier was a little bit hard. Unlike Honduras, where I was able to speak Spanish with the children and have actual conversations, these children spoke Thai, and I know basically zero Thai. So all we really could do to communicate with them was smile, play games, and just do things with them. For example, we separated beans for hours. So they had beans that we would have to take the bad parts off and keep the good parts. We sang worship songs together. It was a really beautiful moment when one song we sang, they knew it in Thai and we knew it in English. So we were just singing the words as loud as we could with two different languages at once. And it was really, really a beautiful and powerful moment. We also did a Bible skit for the children that was translated into Thai by a translator there. And it was just really neat to experience what it was like in the village for these children and see what the Lighthouse in Action ministry does to try to prevent the parents and the people from sending their children to the city to this sex trade. So those are the two kind of parts that ministry was involved in that we spent a lot of time with. We also did a lot of touring of Chiang Mai. So the city itself is very big. It has a lot of history. One day we walked around and just tried to experience what the culture is like there. And so there's Buddhist temples everywhere. I don't know if you've seen pictures of Buddhist temples, but they're absolutely beautiful. And a lot of them are very old. And so a lot of ornate drawings, a lot of gold, a lot of Buddha statues. And we would go into the temples and see lots of people just bowing down to these Buddha statues. We were able to do something called a monk chat, which means that we would talk to a Buddhist monk and they would just sit outside the temple for anyone to come and ask them questions. And so we talked with one monk for quite a while, and something interesting he said was that he actually came from a Christian home, but he ended up turning to Buddhism because he felt like he should have to do something in order to earn salvation. And he said Christianity seemed too easy. And so this was something kind of sad that we heard. I don't know what kind of Christian home he came from. I don't know what exactly that means or what he was told. But a lot of people throughout that country are drawn to Buddhism, maybe for that reason, because they have to do actions, they have to do things themselves in order to earn that good status, in order to earn that enlightenment. And so that was kind of a very prevalent view throughout that country. So very, very heavy Buddhist influence there. The second part of the trip was the missionary conference. So after we visited Lighthouse in Action and learned about all of the sex trade that was going on, all of that very, very sad stories of people and of girls in particular, we went on to stay at a hotel then for the second half and led the children's programming for a missionary conference. And this was made up of different missionary families from all over East Asia. And so they came to a 3-day conference, and the parents would learn about how to educate their kids, how they were doing. A lot of them are homeschoolers because they live in very rural parts of Asia. And while the parents were having this education and such, the children would come to our programming. So I helped with the older kids, and it was really, really neat. They were, I don't know, probably 5th, 6th grade age, younger middle school. And we got to have some really fascinating discussions about what it's like to be a missionary kid. They call them third culture kids, meaning that they don't really fit into the country they're living in since they're from America, but they also don't really fit into America because they spend most of their time in that country their family's serving in. So it's called third culture because they have a hard time really identifying with one culture, and so it's kind of a unique situation for these missionary kids. We also talked a lot about just different things in the Bible. They had a lot of questions. We talked about creation and evolution and all sorts of different stories throughout the Bible. We talked about the plagues in Egypt, and they had lots of questions about that. So it was really neat to just be able to talk with these missionary kids and remind them of what they're doing and how it's a good thing. And during the day of the conference, during lunchtime, us teenagers from the TPS trip were supposed to go out and pick one missionary family to talk with during lunch. And so I ended up having some really fascinating conversations with people. And one in particular was with a couple who actually are serving in Afghanistan. And if you don't know, Afghanistan is a very, very unstable country. The terrorist group, the Taliban, controls, I don't know, I think over 50% of the land there. And so it's very, very dangerous. And this couple had 2 sons who were at the conference. One was in my group. And they hesitated to tell us what country they were serving in because it's so dangerous and so kind of secretive that they're Christians being there as missionaries because they're not supposed to be, according to the government there. And so they would tell us stories of how, you know, they can't go down certain streets sometimes because they heard that there are bombs there. And just really the dangerous environment. But it really struck me that this family, they stay in that city, they stay in the country of Afghanistan, even though it's not the most secure place, even though it's not the most safe, but because they know that there's something more important, which is spreading the gospel and the good news to these people. And so they're trying to just develop relationships with the people of these villages, and obtain trust with them, and therefore eventually hope to share about God. So that's one story from my trip to Thailand. Another one, kind of similar to the story of that translator in Honduras. In my trip to Thailand, there was one girl that I was roommates with during that time at the hotel. It was several nights. And one night she just really was able to open up to me about a lot of family struggles she was going through, some personal things that she also been going through. And once again, I was able to just offer some advice, maybe just someone to listen to her because a lot of people weren't at home. So again, God put this in these situations. I wasn't expecting again to be able to kind of reach out to someone just from my own team, someone who came from America as well, but we were able to have a lot of really, really good conversations and just reach out to her in that way. So takeaways from this trip, I'm surrounded by a lot of like-minded people in my circle of friends here in America, and just to visit another country which is heavily Buddhist kind of opened my eyes to the different religions throughout the world, I guess. And even though America is not necessarily all Christian anymore, it's very common for me just to be surrounded by Christians a lot of times. So it opened my eyes to a lot of the world doesn't believe what I believe, and a lot of them are, you know, different in that way. But I also was really impacted by the truth that God loves everyone and everyone has worth, which is different than what Buddhism teaches. John 1:12 says, "But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." and that God really gives us the opportunity to become his children, his child, is just so amazing. And I love that it's such a different message than that of what Buddhism teaches. So really reinforcing the worth of every human, especially the message of love that God gives to each of us. Another thing personally for me during this Thailand trip, I was struggling with a lot of sickness actually during the first half of it. And I don't know if this was because of jet lag or because I just had a cold during that time, but I felt like I was unable to do a lot of effective like talking to people in the first part of the trip, or even speaking out loud. I was coughing a lot. And it really ended up teaching me how God works through our weaknesses and not necessarily through our strengths, and how I was probably trying to rely on myself too much instead of just letting God himself do the work. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." So just kind of encouragement if you're doing missions work in the future, just if you're reaching out to someone and you feel inadequate or you feel weak for some reason. I know I did during that part of the trip, but God was still able to work through that and remind me that it's really him doing it. It's really God and the Holy Spirit that can reach out to people, and we're just his instruments, and we are imperfect. So God definitely can work through our weaknesses. So these are just the 2 trips that I went on. Hopefully these stories were encouraging to you. I would definitely encourage you to go on one of them if you can. They're definitely life-changing. But if you don't go on a particular missions trip, there's definitely ways you can take these lessons and apply them to your own lives. Take these words from scripture and apply it to your own life in America. If you're a family, if you're anyone with some spare time, there's lots of ways you can reach out to those in America who don't have a lot of exposure to the gospel or just who need that teaching. If you're in college, there's lots of campus ministries. I'm planning on getting involved in one of them when I go to college in the fall. So bottom line that I would like to encourage you all today is don't stay in your comfort zone, even though it seems nice and safe and secure. We as Christians are called to reach out to the world, and whether that's halfway across the globe in Thailand or whether it's, a bit south in Honduras or right where you are today, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. And so I would encourage you to just have this reminder today to continue to reach out to those around you who don't know the love of God, because God can do powerful things even through us imperfect people. All right, so can we pray together just to close this missions report out? Dear Lord, I thank you for the opportunities I was able to go on to visit these different cultures throughout the world and see how you're working. And I pray that some of these stories would really impact some of the people listening today, that they would be reminded that you are powerful, that you love everyone, and that there is a huge need throughout the world and throughout our country as well of people who need to know the love of you and need to be open to the truth of your gospel. Lord, I thank you for the reminders of the poverty of the world, the depravity of the world, and also the encouragement that you are working in each of those situations. I pray for each of us as we go throughout our lives in this next week that you would help us be able to reach out to those in our communities, in our friend groups, in our colleges, or even in our families who need to hear more about you. Thank you so much, Lord, for everything you have done for us. In Jesus' name, amen.